Afternoon, everybody. I'm Miriam Cates. I'm sorry I'm late. I've been presenting 4 hours of coverage of Trooping the Colour this morning, which was quite an ordeal given that I knew very little about it. But there was an amazing comedy moment. So I was on GB News, obviously, presenting Trooping the Colour, talking through the different horses and all the different movements of the royal family. And then at the end of the parade, we had a guest come on down the line, a royal expert. And my co-presenter said to her, so what did you think of this morning's Trooping the Colour? And she said, well, I thought Claire Baldwin was fantastic. Anyway, I'm afraid I did actually lose it and giggle so much that they had to take me off the screen. Anyway, I was actually going to start with telling you about my morning. It wasn't all quite as hilarious. That I woke up here in London in the beautiful sunshine in total peace and quiet. I had a leisurely shower, I made a coffee, I read the papers, I had a nice leisurely walk down to Victoria Station, I got on the tube, I headed to Paddington, breakfast from Pret a Manger, turned up to GB News, had my makeup and hair done. Yeah, I don't normally do it like this, didn't do it myself. And then I sat down with the team to run through the show, spent 4 hours in the studio, having some stimulating conversation about the history of Trooping the Colour with some fascinating experts. Every so often, someone came in to bring us coffee, to touch up my lipstick. But why am I telling you this? I'm not trying to make you jealous of working for GB News, although I would highly recommend it. But I'm telling it to you to contrast with my morning yesterday. I couldn't sleep. I got up at 5:30. I went downstairs. At first I thought we'd been burgled, and then I remembered that's what our kitchen always looks like. I fought my way through dirty dishes to boil the kettle and make coffee. I made one half of one child's packed lunch. I fed the cats. And then the morning rush starts. 2 teens who struggle to get out of bed. 1 preteen who's lost his PE shorts again. Then begins the carefully coordinated shower relay. Meanwhile, I'm packing my bag to come to London. My daughter remembers she has a physics exam and asks me to explain specific heat capacity. Meanwhile, I unpack her lunchbox from yesterday, realise she hasn't eaten any fruit and vegetables again. My husband wonders where our sons have got to and finds my teenage son using our 11-year-old son as a human dumbbell that he's bench pressing on the floor of the living room. We eventually bundle into the car, children bickering, and narrowly avoid running over the cat. Now, when we talk about the ideal of family, especially those of us in the public eye, we mustn't forget the reality of family life. It's hard, it's messy, there are good times, there are bad times. We worry about our children, we worry about our parenting. I often worry that I don't worry enough. At the moment, I'm working away from home a lot, and I worry about that. Now, I'm not saying it's ever been easy to raise children, but it is particularly challenging right now because we're doing it alone. And I don't mean single parenting, although of course that is especially challenging. I mean that we're parenting in the context of a culture that thinks parenting is a private endeavour. The government's idea of help is not to share the burden or back you up, but if your children are small, to take them off you. If they're a bit older, it's to say that tech exploitation is your problem. If they're teens that are struggling, it's to tell us, parents, that we are the problem. And if you're poor and you find yourself pregnant, you're told, don't be irresponsible. Either get rid of the baby or accept poverty. And it's not just the government. Society has this attitude too. Many people complain if they have to make any sort of sacrifices on behalf of other people's children. And we see this in debates about whether families should be taxed less or children given more child benefits. People do not want their hard-earned cash, as they see it, to go to other people's private luxury, our children. And we see people judging rather than helping parents who are struggling with uncooperative toddlers or uncooperative teenagers. So what's happened? We used to have a culture that understood that family was the foundation of society, that family is the building block, the bricks that build our community and our nation. And the problem is that no one can agree anymore on what that building block looks like, or even what that building block should be made out of. A family can be anything you want it to be. We've privatised the idea of the family when it used to be a public institution. And when you try and build a wall out of bricks that have wildly different shapes or are made from completely different materials, or bricks that are not bricks at all, well, don't be surprised when the house falls down. There is such a thing as family. And I don't mean that all families are or should be the same. But we do need a common understanding of what family is and what family is for. And I believe that strong families are built on three principles, three pillars that have stood us in good stead for hundreds of years. So what are those three pillars of the family? Well, I believe first is a belief in the sacred worth of children. Second, the establishment of lifelong monogamous marriage. And thirdly, the upholding of parental authority. So let's explore those. Children are of sacred worth. In modern Western countries, which of course were founded on Judeo-Christian values, the idea that all children are precious and should be protected from harm is just assumed. We don't always act upon it, but that is our assumption. But this hasn't always been the case. In the ancient world, it was common for children to be sacrificed or for parents to leave unwanted babies out to die of exposure. Yet in contrast to neighbouring tribes, Jewish law forbade child sacrifice. And the Christian faith, of course, begins with a helpless baby whose parents prioritised his welfare above all else, even fleeing to Egypt to preserve his life. And the adult Jesus, in contrast to the culture of his day, held children in high esteem. He blessed them instead of ignoring them, as his disciples would have preferred. And Jesus reserved his greatest condemnation for those who lead children astray, saying it were better for him that a millstone was hanged about his neck and he cast into the sea than he should offend one of these little ones. Now, the Western belief in the sacred worth of children is not a universal value. And whether or not we are a practicing Christian society, that belief that children are sacred stems directly from the Judeo-Christian tradition. But this belief isn't and never was just an abstract idea. It was realised through structures and institutions that ensure children are nurtured and protected from infancy. Monogamous marriage, the lifelong public and exclusive union of one man with one woman, has proven to be the most reliable structure to provide this nurture and this protection for children. And lifelong monogamy is also not either a natural or a universal idea. Yet Christianity established monogamous marriage as foundational as an institution for Western civilization. Of course, marriage ensures that the desires and whims of adults are restrained, protecting children from being deprived of the presence and commitment of both mother and father. So that belief in the sacredness of the child and the commitment to monogamous marriage have formed the basis of the Judeo-Christian family. The third and final pillar of the family, the one that ensures that children are raised into virtuous and flourishing adults, is the expectation that children would obey their parents. Wouldn't that be nice? Parental authority is the medium through which children are kept safe, the medium through which they're trained in the knowledge and the virtues, and through which our cultural inheritance can be transmitted from one generation to the next. So as one generation honours the values and traditions of those who have gone before, the benefits of our civilization, whether they're economic, cultural, social, are passed on through the ages. So those are the three ingredients of the family: the sacredness of children, monogamous marriage, and parental authority. And these are the pillars that have established our society and supported it to flourish as each generation is born and raised and then passes the baton to the next. Yet that family unit, based on those three pillars, was never expected to bear the burden of raising children alone. Those three pillars of the family model stood on the firm foundation of a culture that accepted collective responsibility for raising the young. Through institutions such as the wider community, the church, civic organisations, and a common moral framework, parents were supported in a collaborative effort to raise children. In its most basic manifestation, that support meant that children were held to the same moral standards in public as they were at home. And there'll be some people in this room who might remember a time when, if a child stepped out of line, maybe it was you might be stopped in the street by a stranger who might even march you home and bring you back to your parents. And your parents would have been grateful rather than filing a lawsuit, which is probably more likely to happen today. And our children were initiated into these shared values and beliefs by public displays of tradition and festival, not just by the private efforts of individual parents. Now, of course, there's never been a time when society has perfectly lived up to this responsibility. We can think back to Victorian times, or street children, or orphanages, or horrendous prostitution in a couple of hundred years ago on the streets of London. But not for a long time has society so clearly and so explicitly turned its back on accepting that shared responsibility to raise the next generation. And we can see this again in the debate surrounding this 2-child limit. And there are a range of views on whether or not you should have benefits for extra children. I'm not talking about the details of that. But the principle is that children are a private luxury, and you better not have any more than you can afford. We could say exactly the same thing about buying a nice car. We've lost the sense that children are a public good, that our collective future is dependent on us as a society having children and raising them well. So with the foundations, those 3 foundations, so eroded, it is completely unsurprising that the pillars are crumbling. Our children no longer hold sacred worth. The legalisation and expansion of abortion has transformed our children from being a blessing to a choice, and some of you will be aware that next week in Parliament, MPs are due to vote on whether to decriminalise all abortion to birth, and the fact that we are having a debate about whether to legalise infanticide takes us back to the Roman era, in my opinion. The sacred nature of childhood, as well as children, is also being eroded, and we increasingly see children treated as mini-adults rather than at a distinctly vulnerable stage of life. And if children aren't special, if they're not distinct from adults, then their requirement for protection is not absolute. Rather, it can be balanced against all manner of competing interests, and we saw this during the pandemic. We've seen it demonstrated as the failure of society to even want to protect children from underage sex, to protect them from smartphones or the harms of gender ideology. And as children and childhood have been devalued, so has the principal institution that the West has relied upon to raise them. The collapse of marriage rates and marriage durability has resulted in more and more children being raised without a present father. The elites have continued to get married and stay married, whilst telling everybody else not to bother. And again, we see that public failure to support the institution of marriage. We now see marriage as a private matter rather than a social essential. And of course, the fall in marriage rates has directly affected birth rates, and that, of course, is threatening society's future altogether. And as parental relationships have been undermined, so has parental authority. Many parents simply don't know how to train children in even the basics of social control or moral behaviour. And last year in the United Kingdom, an extraordinary 25% of 4-year-olds started school without being toilet trained. Many are unable to dress themselves, to communicate with others, or follow simple instructions. Of course, babies are not born with the ability to regulate their emotions or delay gratification or respond to boundaries. These virtues have to be consistently modelled and taught by parents. And that parental authority has been appallingly weakened by the internet, by smartphones, such as we can no longer even control the influences over our children, and parental authority has been undermined by the state. Until recently, it was understood that parents held the primary authority for a child's moral development, yet many schools now see it as their responsibility to drive social and even sexual change, swapping the teaching of knowledge and skills for false and destabilising ideologies such as critical race theory, queer theory, gender ideology, and climate catastrophism. And when parental authority is undermined like that, children just can't be raised well. Children can't be kept safe without parental authority. And now we see these 3 essential pillars of the family in danger of falling down entirely. Liberalism has a lot to answer for. Instead of encouraging the collective responsibility for the raising of children, liberalism is inherently anti-child because children, of course, constrain the autonomy of adults. But perhaps nothing undermines our families more than the welfare state and the tax system, which has been designed around the individual rather than the family. We've completely socialised the cost of old age, and we've privatised the cost of having children. And in doing so, we've removed the link between having children and prosperity, which is a link that has kept people having children since time began. People didn't used to have children for romantic reasons or for reasons of choice. They had them because it was an economic necessity. And yet now, if you have children, you will pay all the costs of raising them alone, but the state will reap all the rewards. No matter how well you raise your children, how well you educate them, how much they contribute to society, their taxes will go to pay for the costs of other people's parents, of people who are not even supposed to be in this country, of people who have not looked after themselves. I'm not advocating that we should get rid of the state pension. Every time I do that, I get told off. But nevertheless, we do need to restore not just a social link and an emotional link that makes once people have children, but an economic reward. When you have children, you should reap an economic reward. It shouldn't be entirely cost. We cannot continue with a situation where those who bear and raise children have to carry the cost alone. We've got to rebuild these pillars of the family. But first of all, we have to restore those foundations to revive a collective responsibility for raising the next generation. Well, how do we do that? Well, we need to continue to advocate for the family, continue to expose what's going wrong, advocate for law change, advocate for schools to stop overstepping the mark. But what we're really advocating for is to restore boundaries. And liberalism sees boundaries as harmful, as a threat to individual autonomy. But as parents, we know that boundaries are essential to raising children. Parents who don't enforce boundaries, and we've all been there, they spoil their children. Boundaries keep us safe, but boundaries are useless if we don't enforce them. And a very obvious example of this is borders. The United Kingdom has a border, but we don't enforce it, so it might as well not be there. Or take marriage. We make promises, public declaration, we sign it into law. But thanks to the no-fault divorce law, there are no longer any barriers to ending a marriage. It might as well not be there. Or take sexual boundaries. We have an age of consent, but we don't enforce it. And as the horrific rape gang scandal has proven, when adults in positions of authority do nothing when boundaries are crossed, we might as well not have an age of consent. Or take the abortion debate next year. The proponents of this decriminalisation amendment say that it won't change the time limit of abortions. But of course it will. If a boundary is not enforced, it might as well not be there. Or take our attitude to crime. Many criminals aren't jailed to their 25th, their 35th, or even their 40th offence. The law is useless if it's not enforced. But despite all the evidence, liberals continue to believe that people can be virtuous without boundaries. They still maintain that enforcing boundaries is cruel. But I don't think it is compassion that motivates them. I think it's cowardice. No normal person enjoys enforcing boundaries. As parents, our hearts sink when children cross a line and we have to enforce whatever harebrained consequence we've made up on the spot. No one normal likes the idea of putting a young man in prison or a young woman having to go through a pregnancy that she doesn't want. No one wants to tell off a stranger's child in public. No one wants to turn back the boats. But without boundaries that are enforced, children and indeed all of society cannot be safe and cannot flourish. If we want to restore the foundations of the family, we need to learn how to advocate for enforcing boundaries. We need to relearn the idea that boundaries are not cruel, but kind. That without shared boundaries, we can't take collective responsibility for our children. And without collective responsibilities, families cannot flourish. So I think our job, Family Education Trust's job, over the next few years is, yes, to carry on doing all the amazing work and research that you're already doing. But let's make the case for boundaries. Let's make boundaries great again. Let's make people realise that boundaries, shared boundaries, are essential to our flourishing. Thank you.